Hey there. So I just finished installing this climbing net for our playhouse here. This has been a project that's been going on for 4 months now, and the climbing net was one of the last things that I needed to get done. And this part I thought was going to be a little bit easier than it was. I ran into a few obstacles here. I'm going to walk you through step by step how I installed this and some of the rework that I had to do to get it just right so you can avoid similar mistakes that I made. The net that we're using for this project is a cargo net. It's a 12 foot by 8 foot. It's got nice stitching at each of the intersections between the vertical and horizontal pieces. So with this net, you can see the ends of the net have the loops here, and those go all along the perimeter, both the sides, tops, bottoms, everywhere. So that gives plenty of area here to make your attachments to the structure. So this is the first time that I've ever installed a cargo net, and so I can envision that we're going to have two different mounting methods. One method will be used to attach the net to the structure itself, then the other method is going to be used to attach the net to the ground at the bottom of the play structure. So to attach the cargo net to our playhouse itself, I picked up some hardware, a U-bolt, quick link, I-bolt, thinking that I'd use some combination of these to attach it, and ultimately I ended up finding a much easier method. So I ended up kind of scrapping these pieces of hardware, but depending on what you're mounting to, different types of hardware like this may actually come in handy. And here's a little mock-up that I was toying around with just as I was trying to evaluate the hardware and see if they would work. Both the U-bolt or the I-bolt and the quick links are shown here. They both would have worked, and this mock-up kind of shows the different layers of the LP Smart side, the plywood sheathing, and the stud behind it. So I think these would have been fine to use to attach the top of the cargo net to the playhouse, but ultimately I had a much simpler solution. So after toying around with the hardware for a lot longer than I probably should have, I came to the realization that I could essentially just rip down some 2x4s so that they're 2.5 inches wide. They fit through the loops on the cargo net perfectly, and so instead of having to use any of the I-bolts or U-bolts, I can essentially just use the ledger here to hold the cargo net. This ledger is going to be lagged into the playhouse structure, into the rim joist and other 2x material. So this will have a nice strong connection to the playhouse and give a nice strong connection for the cargo net to attach to. This here is a quick sketch of the original design I was planning on going for. It kind of shows the layout of the ledger boards going around the opening that the cargo net would lead into on the playhouse. And my thought here was to use kind of diagonals for the sides of the ledger boards there to kind of be able to form a wall with the cargo net. And ultimately this ended up not working out. I ended up scrapping this idea, and I'll show you what I ended up with. So this here is after I have kind of those angled ledger boards in place, trying to form a wall with the net. Kind of just pulling it, testing it out. At this stage, not really sure how it's going to turn out. Seems like there's some slack here. So this here is pretty much when my concern is really setting in, and I figure at this stage I may as well put a few anchors into the ground and really try and gauge the overall shape, and from there make a decision on whether or not this is going to work or if I need to go in a different direction. Alright, so I've got about half a dozen anchors into the ground now, and this is pretty much, I think, what our net structure is looking like. I'm not super thrilled with it. There's a lot of twists in the net, lots of slack in the net, especially as they kind of ride up along the walls there. And I do think that is because of the shape that I put those ledger boards in. So in theory, I don't think this was a horrible idea, but it just didn't work out. I wasn't able to get the net tight enough on the sides, lots of slack and lots of twists, where I think that actually posed more of a safety hazard than just having a straight board. So that's what I ended up doing in these next steps, is installing a straight board to replace the curved ledger boards there. Got a 10-footer here that I'll cut to length and get that tacked up there. Similar fashion, I'll loop the cargo net around our new ledger board and get it hung. So I've got the ledger board stained to match the trim on the Playhouse here, and now I'm just looping it through the cargo net, trying to get things centered up. So our ledger board has been looped now and got everything stretched out pretty nice and tight there. And fortunately, the measurements came out to be just about perfect to line up with the overall width of our Playhouse here. So before fully lagging this ledger board in, I'm just tacking it up with a few construction screws. I want to just kind of make sure everything's going to fit before putting some larger lag holes into the side of the Playhouse. Got the ledger tacked up with just a few screws here, and now what we're going to do is re-anchor this back into the ground. I'll be moving the placement of these anchors to align with this new configuration. So at this stage, I'm just trying to get the net lined up so it's kind of going pretty much straight from top to bottom to the ground there. And I've got these spiral earth anchors and some quick links at the bottom of the cargo net. Ultimately, I ended up going in a slightly different direction. I still used the anchors, but I ended up not using the quick links, and I'll go ahead and show you why here in a second. And here's how it looked after I got all the quick links and ground anchors installed and attached the cargo net. It's kind of a pain dealing with all those anchors and getting them into the ground, and then also trying to get the cargo net tight enough there. So after using this climbing net for a few days, I've noticed that the ground around the anchors is kind of starting to soften up and making everything a little more loose here. Even the net, where it was pretty taut the other day when I first installed this, has really loosened up. So I think what I'm going to try to do is I've got another 2x4 cut to 2.5 inches wide here. So similar to the top ledger up there, I'm planning on slipping this through the bottom loops along the length of this net here. I'm hoping this will help kind of distribute the load and soften maybe some of the force that's being applied to each of these anchors individually. I'm feeling like as people step on certain parts of this net, it's applying more force in certain areas. And so hopefully a solid 2x4 essentially will kind of just distribute things out. And so this is a couple days later, and as you can see, the base of our net has been changed a little bit here. And I ended up replacing the green anchors with deeper red anchors that go down 30 inches. So this is the 30-inch anchor that I'm using for the base. It's a bit thicker than kind of these spiral anchors. The spiral ones went down about 15 inches. So you can see I'm getting essentially twice as much anchorage with the red ones there. So really getting into the ground more. So I ended up sandwiching the anchors between the 2x4 that is going through the loops. Then I used another 2x4 back here, and I lagged them into each other. So this is going through each of the boards and also through the loop there in the anchors. I've got essentially 6 of those anchors spaced throughout here, so that force isn't getting applied as much to the anchors. It's kind of being distributed throughout these boards, and it's providing a much steadier base here to support this net. Here's our son climbing on up. You can see as he's climbing, very minimal movement down here. So I'm optimistic that this will hold. And honestly, if we find that these really do loosen up too much over time, figure what I'll do is probably throw a little cement into a couple of the holes around those anchors. That way it just keeps everything in place a little better. Overall, this took about 6 hours to install. Again, probably the most amount of work was just getting the base secured. So this is a fun addition to the Playhouse here, a little bit different than a traditional slide or rock wall using the climbing net, but getting a lot of use and enjoyment out of it. So after having this installed for about a month now, this net is still holding strong. The base is holding steady. It really hasn't loosened up at all. The net is still pretty tight. So I'm optimistic that this is going to be a good final solution for us. But otherwise, there's definitely plenty of other ways to anchor a net like this to the ground, even if it involves putting in some cement footings. Wouldn't be all that difficult either. So hopefully this video helps you. Feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks.